Hello, everyone. This is Adam with PsychedelicInvest.com. I hope you guys are all having a wonderful day today. In today's special episode, I'm joined by CEO of Cybin, Doug Drysdale. In this episode, we're going to be having a conversation about everything Cybin, so I hope you guys are ready for this. Without further ado, let's get started. All right, guys. The first question was cut out due to an error in the recording software. So I'm just going to read it here, and then we're going to cut right to the interview with Doug Drysdale, where he responds to the question that I'm going to read off right now. So let's get to this. Here's the first question. Was acquiring the Mindset IP a strategy to defend your own IP, to build a catalog of patents for sale, or do you see value in pursuing trials with some of these molecules? Also, if you can go into detail with the new Amorphous Psilocybin patent.
Cybin has a track record already of acquiring IP. And by IP, I mean data, know-how, technology, and patents. It's not just patents. There's a whole range of things. We acquired Adelia Therapeutics back in December of 2020. We acquired a DMT study from Entheon Biomedical, which included a lot of access to dosing data for DMT. As you mentioned, we also licensed some patents from Mindset, and we've also done some other patent licensing as well. And that all of those deals collectively give us access to 10 to 15 trillion molecules. So we're building a platform here. We're building a platform for multiple generations of psychedelic-based therapeutics, not just one or two products. And it's essential that we protect the space we work in, whether it's discovery or it's preclinical or clinical. There's no sense investing time, people resources, and money into work if you've not got at least some level of protection when you're getting started. So, the Mindset transaction sort of fits into that general philosophy. We liked that area that they had filed in, and it overlapped with an area that we were interested in working in, so it was a good fit. So in terms of the Amorphous filing, so it is a filing. It's not granted yet, but it is interesting. I spent about a decade working in the generics industry, creating paragraph 4 opportunities. So these are opportunities where you circumvent or invalidate companies' patents in order to bring low-cost treatments to market. So I just have that kind of mindset of looking at the entire IP landscape. And early on, we brought in some folks to look at the landscape and say, well, not just look at how we're protecting our work, but what are the gaps in other people's work? Those gaps are opportunities and vulnerabilities. So Amorphous is an interesting concept. It's not uncommon. This patent has claims that cover amorphous formulations, which means basically that they're not crystalline. Right? Crystalline structures have an organized structure. Amorphous structure formulations do not. And there's been a lot of debate about polymorph A and what other polymorphs may exist. And I don't need to go into that whole argument. But one concept you might say is, well, let's avoid the crystalline polymorphs altogether, and let's create something that's amorphous. So this is a space outside of the crystalline IP to operate, whether that's for Cybin or whether it's for someone else or a partner. We'll see. But amorphous forms are interesting. They can be more soluble. They can have improved bioavailability. They can have a faster onset. But at the moment, it's just a filing. We'll see what happens with that.
All right. So to build on I understand it's just a filing right now, but to build on the Amorphous Psilocybin, because I think it's pretty exciting. So if granted, would this leap you over Compass's polymorph patent? Was this a plan to get around Compass's pathways patent?
Look, I don't want to speculate on what will be granted, right? So in any patent, there are multiple claims, and often not all claims are granted. So I don't want to speculate what the patent office will grant. But in our view, crystalline formulations and amorphous formulations are separate. Yeah, they're not the same, and they could exist in parallel. Let's just put it that way.
All right, awesome. Thank you for the response. Another follow-up. So obviously it's more or less a patent war right now when it comes to business strategies. So I'm curious to what kind of hurdles this is creating, or what kind of roadblocks this will put this will put up that ultimately ends up hindering the evolution of these treatments? And what other companies in this sector are making it difficult to get where we need to be?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a patent war, honestly, but it is certainly an emerging landscape. It has been for a little while, and it will continue to be so for quite a while. It's still a bit of an iceberg field, right? So we can see the tips of the icebergs, but there's still a lot underneath. Um, and the way that companies often operate with patents is as you go from discovery, where you know about the molecule, through preclinical work, where you're learning a lot about the properties of the molecule, into clinical work, where you're understanding how the molecule exerts its effects within the body. You're learning more and you're collecting data. And often patents get continued and more data gets added, and that also keeps them from being entirely public. So I think we're going to see a lot of that happening. And we're going to see patents emerge over time. Look, it's important, as I said, to build a moat. It's not just about one single patent. We've had a composition of matter patent granted for our CYB4 deuterated DMT molecule, and that's kind of the holy grail. But companies never rely upon a single patent. We've got now access to 35 patents around our programs. Um, but that said, I think there are only still at this point, frankly, about half a dozen or so psychedelic development companies that are really have the capacity and the wherewithal to continue. There are many others, and some of them have IP, and there may be some overlap in there. I think you'll see some deals, which is fairly typical. You'll see licensing deals, royalty deals, if those emerging patents become obstacles or challenging. It's hard to interpret. Patents are complicated. If they were clean cut, it'd be a lot easier. But often, whether a claim overlaps another claim is open to legal interpretation, and in general ends up with some kind of negotiation. So we'll see. I think we'll see continually emerging landscape. I don't think it's a war. I think companies are very much focused on their own work and trying to protect what they're doing. But it's just inevitable, uh, given that we're working with a lot of similar structured molecules, that there's going to be some overlap at some point along the way.
All right, to build on the question I just asked you, so then would there be so in terms of like when you guys have these press releases where you guys filed for this patent or filed for that patent, would there be any type of situation where you guys would not have a press release because you would want to, I guess, not tip off competitors to what patents you're filing for, or is that something that doesn't exist in terms of how you guys are approaching things?
Yeah, I'm not sure that announcing filings has much relevance. You can file almost anything you want. It's what gets granted that matters. So I know companies are issuing releases around filings, and I think if they're confident that they've got the space that they can own, that makes some sense. Why not? And I know that in this environment, companies are trying to keep momentum going. But at the end of the day, whatever you release about filings or whatever's in the public domain about filings from the patent office, what matters at the end of the day is what's granted.
Awesome. All right. So next question. Assuming CYB003 is successful, CYB for the viewers watching, CYB003 is deuterated psilocybin. Assuming CYB003 is successful in trials and gets FDA or Health Canada approval, what is the vision for monetization routes? Licensing the technology to clinics or finding a way to vertically integrate?
Yeah, I mean, neither of those really. I don't see that clinic integration makes a lot of sense for us. It's a different value proposition, it's a different business model, a different time horizon to profitability, a different ROI, it's a different investor group. I think it's very hard to have a clinic business and a drug development business. They're really quite distinct. Um, and also our goal is to save our capital for drug development, not for real estate or for services. That said, clinics are really important. They're going to be important for administration of care. They're going to be important for distribution. And we're already seeing an increase in ketamine clinics. We see TMS clinics, transcranial magnetic stimulation clinics, which I think are quite an obvious group to adopt psychedelic treatments. And I think we'll see other providers that adapt to their businesses to psychedelics. We saw that with Botox, right? When Botox came along, Many physicians decided to get trained and set up Botox centers. We see specific dialysis centers for kidney issues. We see chemotherapy centers where those drugs are administered. So providers know how to make money. They know how to operate and bring through patients in an efficient, cost-effective way. And if they see that they can make money from the administration of psychedelics, and there's demand, which I expect there will be, then I think we'll see existing businesses adapt, and we'll see new businesses start. But working with clinics as we are, and talking regularly with providers that run clinics, we're constantly learning about what their business model is and what their hurdles are, what kind of protocols they need to see to make psychedelics viable in the real world. So it's an important partnership. We're kind of relying upon each other, but we're not planning to start our own clinics. I think there's plenty of folks out there that know how to do that better than we do.
Understood. Next question. What will the strategy be for financing upcoming growth and the costs associated with it? And what is the timeline for progressing your psychedelics to therapeutics? How many years approximately until we have completed trials and are ready to go to market? And then the question goes on to ask how much of a cash runway is left. So based on the last earnings report, I think it was about 30 million Canadian. Please.
Yeah, we can start there with the runway. We had, I think, mid-November, we announced we had 27 million Canadian on the balance sheet. We also have an active ATM, or at the market offering, which had capacity at that point of 38 million Canadian. Excuse me. So that's a total of 65 million Canadian total access to cash. We burn about $10 million a quarter. So 65 versus 10, I think we have a pretty strong runway ahead of us, and we think the macro environment is going to improve. Well, we have a number of catalysts coming up in the first quarter and beyond that I can talk about. But in terms of the overall ability to raise cash for everyone in the space, and actually not just in psychedelics, but across biotech and many other sectors, it's been a long biotech bear market. I think it peaked in February 2021. And has been kind of gradually coming down. One of the longest, maybe the longest biotech bear market I've ever seen. That said, when you look back at every biotech bear market, once they hit bottom, and which is always tough to call, they kind of roar back to where they were within about 12 months. Because it's really sentiment driven, right? There's nothing fundamental that's changed about the biotech business model. Biotechs create a lot of value. And I'm feeling more optimistic now than I've felt for the last few months. We're starting to see some of the macro indicators improve. I think CPI and PPI have come in below estimates, which is good. It means prices are coming down. Inflation is down in Europe a little, which is a good sign. So maybe that's, along with CPI and PPI, indicates that maybe inflation has peaked. Excuse me. GDP was up in the US last quarter, so we've got growth. The job market is a little softer, which is not a bad thing if you're looking at avoiding a recession. And we're starting to see M&A in biotech. I mean, really quite a busy week we've had with Amgen acquiring Horizon for $28 billion. Really happy for Tim Walbert, good guy who runs Horizon. Takeda, the Takeda Nimbus deal, which was $6 billion. Praxis UCB deal that was announced last night. So we're starting to see some really meaningful M&A, and we're starting to see some of the macro indicators improve. So I'm feeling very optimistic about what the first part of next year might look like. I mean, I'm not an economist, but certainly been tracking this for quite a while, and it looks good to me. At the end of the day, though, data drives value, and we've got a number of data catalysts coming up. Obviously, those catalysts are better received in a bull market, so let's hope we do see that improve. And that value creation supports financing, and typically you see biotech valuations become exponential after phase 2B. And I think we're in a slightly different situation with our psychedelic programs, in that they're based on psilocybin and DMT, which are somewhat de-risked. We know a lot about the chemistry, metabolism, toxicology. So I don't necessarily believe that 2B is the value driver. I think that we can show that we have an improved properties over those generic molecules, and I think that those are really good inflection points for us. As you come up in the next year, our psilocybin analog program 003, we expect to see PK data in the first quarter, and that's going to be really important. Not just about how quick and how short we expect to see those sessions. It might be hard to see that with the early cohorts, but one of the aspects I think is really overlooked with psilocybin is the variability, and we'll talk about that a little bit a little while as well. But I think psilocybin is highly variable, and that impacts data, that impacts outcomes, and so I'm excited about that readout coming up in the first quarter. We'll also have DMT dosing data in quarter one. We'll have some other announcements around our Deuterated DMT program. We've got readouts from our kernel study coming out, neuroimaging study. We'll have outputs from the University of Washington EMBARK study coming in the first half. We've got some other programs we've been working on that we have not announced that are waiting on data. So quite honestly, in the first half of next year, we have a good number of catalysts coming up. And we have, I think, an improving macro environment as well, and good access to cash. So I'm not overly concerned and feeling more optimistic than I have done for the last couple of quarters.
For when you mentioned CYB 003, you said the duration. Were you referencing the duration of the psychedelic experience?
Yeah, it was.
Is there any way you can speak more on that in detail a little?
Yeah, so the goal with CYB3 was to create a psilocybin version, an analog that had a faster onset, a shorter duration, as one set of goals, and two other goals with the program as well. One was reducing dosing through deuteration. Deuteration improves bioavailability and brain penetration. That means it's getting out of the plasma space into the brain space more efficiently, more quickly. So you're getting more psilocin in the brain at the site of action that helps you get to full receptor occupancy faster than with psilocybin, we believe, at low doses. So we expect our dose of CYB3 to be lower, maybe half, we'll see, of what you expect with psilocybin, and that might mean fewer side effects. So we'll see from the PK data whether we're faster, shorter, what the dosing is, and we'll also learn about variability. So let me touch on variability a little bit more. When we look at academic studies and the experience there, we know that some patients, say on 25 milligrams of psilocybin, have a quite profound experience, and others might have a more moderate experience. So they're not really getting into that psychedelic state. And that's because we have a lot of variances within our body. We have variances in receptor density. We have polymorphisms of our receptors, but with psilocybin specifically, it needs to be metabolized to psilocin, and that liver metabolism varies considerably between individuals. And that's not just true for psilocybin, it's true for a lot of drugs that need to be metabolized. And we saw those variances also in our preclinical work. And the problem is with those variances is that when you're giving a single set dose of psilocybin, you'll have some patients that respond well and others that don't respond well because of that variance in metabolism. They're not getting as much psilocin into their brain. And maybe those patients need a higher dose, but they're not getting the higher dose. They're getting the same dose as everyone else in the study. So those patients that may not respond as well drag down the data. It might be where we're seeing in some of these larger studies, maybe not quite as profound outcomes as we'd expected to see from the academic studies. So what we're seeing with CYB3 is that the data sets are much tighter. There's much less variance in plasma levels with CYB3 than with psilocybin. And that means you're likely to get more patients into that psychedelic state. You're likely to have a narrower data set. More patients in the psychedelic state means you're getting better receptor occupancy. And in general, when you have patients at a certain level on the visual analog scale in that state, you're getting better outcomes. So that's our hope with CYB3, that we'll have improved outcomes compared to psilocybin, or at least more robust and sort of more consistent outcomes. We'll have an indication of that around mid-year next year. But a good biomarker for that, which we'll see in the first quarter, will be the variability in plasma levels. So if we're seeing a really tight data set between patients that are receiving CYB3 in the first quarter, I think that's a really encouraging sign for us as we go through the rest of the study.
Understood. Thanks for the sponsor. I just want to clear something up for some viewers if they might be confused. So, CYB003 is deuterated psilocybin, which will have a shorter duration than typical traditional psilocybin. Now, but you guys are choosing a specific analog of psilocybin that I'm assuming already has a shorter duration than psilocybin, because wouldn't deuterating it increase the half-life?
Yeah, it's right. Yes and no. So first of all, our analog of psilocybin is not a prodrug. It doesn't require liver metabolism. Where you deuterate the molecule makes a difference. When we deuterate DMT, because DMT is broken down by monoamine oxidase, you're directly slowing the breakdown of DMT, and it makes it longer, and extends DMT. Psilocybin is broken down more by deamination and demethylation, so you're interfering less with the monoamine oxidase, but also where you deuterate on the molecule matters in terms of extending duration and the effects on bioavailability and brain penetration. So it seems a little backwards. It's not the deuteration that is cutting the half-life down with CYB3. It's more the fact that it's not a prodrug. What happens with a deuteration, though, is you're getting better brain penetration and bioavailability.
Understood. Thanks for clarifying that. And I noticed that in general, Cybin has focused on deuterated molecules. So I remember you guys had an early trial where you guys were doing the oral dissolvable film strips for psilocybin. So can you, is there any way you can just elaborate on why you guys decided on deuterating molecules as the route that you wanted to go in?
Yeah, so when we first started Cybin, our first program was a sublingual film version of psilocybin. And the goal there was to achieve what we're trying to achieve with CYB3. Basically, it was trying to avoid liver metabolism and have a faster onset and a shorter duration. We then acquired Adelia Therapeutics in January of 2020. Seems like forever ago now. And with that came this deuteration expertise and know-how, and we filed IP around it as well. We were looking at various formulations of psilocybin, not just the film, but orally disintegrating tablets and others as well. And we were progressing CYB3 at the same time as analog. As we started to get data on them all, it was very clear to us that changing the molecule was a lot more efficient and reliable than simply applying formulation. Also, we'd expect better IP around that as well. So CYB3 kind of was in parallel with CYB1 and another program, and that took the lead because the data was so compelling. So the deuteration expertise came from the Adelia acquisition.
All right, thank you for getting into that. All right, next one. What is Cybin's distinct competitive advantage relative to Atai, Compass, MindMed, and other big players? Sorry, you can
go ahead.
If X is the most important thing to someone looking to invest, what is that X that makes Cybin the better investment? And and can you speak about more about the plan with Embark? Is it intended to be like a MAPS training model or a Numi clinic model ultimately, or both?
Okay, so a couple of different things. And I think I've spoken about some of the distinct advantages with our psilocybin analog.
Mm-hmm.
The overall goal with these first couple of programs is to have IP protected molecules that are short acting and they're predictable. So more scalable because they're short acting, more likely to be reimbursed, lower cost of administration. Half the time in the clinic is half the clinic cost, half the administration cost. And that's a big deal compared to regular psilocybin. And then I've talked about the variability, and I think that'll be a distinct advantage as well. So, we think our psilocybin analog is really well positioned. We may not be first, but we think we've got a really exciting product profile that we're working on. For DMT, the distinct advantage we have there is that through deuterating DMT, we can extend that molecule and that experience out from 5 or 10 minutes to pretty much whatever we want, really, depending on the route of administration. but just deuterating the molecule extends the half-life about threefold, so 30 minutes or so, maybe 30, 40 minutes. 30 minutes, that means that's 16 times the number of patients you can see with CYB4 and treat than you could with generic psilocybin. So we think that's a real advantage again, but again offers physicians choice. Do they want an 8-hour or 10-hour treatment with LSD? Do they want a 6 or 8 hour treatment with psilocybin? Do they want maybe a 2 or 3 hour treatment with CYB3? Do they want a 30, 40 minute treatment with DMT and maybe a slightly different experience? So there's going to be a spectrum of choices, and we think we've got really good product profiles. The other thing with DMT is it is not orally bioavailable. And so, but the deuteration does improve bioavailability and brain penetration, as it does with our psilocybin analog. And that opens up a range of other formulation and drug delivery possibilities. We've managed to improve the oral bioavailability about 2,000%, the inhaled bioavailability about 40%. So that opens different routes of administration outside of IV that could be a lot more convenient for providers and for patients as well. So we focus from the outset, excuse me, we focus from the outset on the patient experience. If the patient experience is good, they'll keep coming back. If the provider experience is good, that'll be their choice for their patients. And if we can keep the cost of administration down, then we think that's a good option for payers as well. And it's really those three groups that you've got to keep happy. So hopefully that answers your sort of differentiation question.
Yeah, for sure it does. I just want to because DMT happens to be something that it's one of my favorite psychedelics in general. So you're saying different routes of administration. So you're saying essentially it would be ingestible, inhalable, and you can IV it as well. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. So typically, we're seeing a few folks look at DMT from an IV point of view. And we are as well in our study that we're running right now in 50 subjects in the Netherlands. We're looking at dosing dynamics with using IV. DMT is broken down really rapidly in the body, so just giving an infusion probably isn't the way to go. It's hard to get a patient up into that DMT space, and takes a long time to get them there. You don't really want to get them there slowly, or too slowly. So that means giving a combination of a bolus followed by an infusion. So a bolus of DMT that gets the patient up into that DMT space, and an infusion that keeps them there. But all we're really doing with that is learning the dosing dynamics and understanding the impact of that on the patient while they're in that DMT space. As we come to operationalize that, commercialize that, if we can avoid that IV route but take those learnings and translate into other formulations that are more convenient, then that would make a lot of sense. We've already done some inhaled work preclinically, where we've shown that we can match the IV profile using an inhaled formulation and improved over regular DMT. We've got IP filed around those inhalation routes as well. We think that the improved bioavailability of deuterated version of DMT, which is quite specific, could help with subcutaneous or IM routes potentially. So there's three options there, and ultimately, we may even get to an oral formulation. We're not there yet, but I think there's lots of different options that open up with the deuteration that you don't have with regular DMT. That's my point.
Understood. Okay, next question. For the viewers who don't know, can you talk about the importance of the collaboration agreement that Cybin has with Greenbrook TMS?
Yeah, so TMS centers, I think, are obvious distributors for and administrators of psychedelic molecules because they see tens of thousands of depressed patients every year. And these are depressed patients that are looking for something different. People are generally searching and looking at TMS if their SSRIs haven't been working adequately, potentially. So that's a great target group of patients for us. And for the TMS centers, being able to offer, an alternative service just adds to their product offerings and their bottom line. So TMS centers are an obvious partner. We partnered with Greenbrook TMS quite some time ago. Last count, they had 169 clinics across the US. And partnering with them early is just makes sense. What they're learning from us about what it's going to take to deliver psychedelic molecules to their patients. We're learning from them about the challenges with the patient throughput process, the patient funnel, patient care. What are the hurdles with protocols that they have? What are the challenges they see with delivering psychedelics that we can address in our clinical trials? So that partnership helps us to develop our treatments with the real world in mind, and not just with an academic outcome in mind. So it's a really good supportive mutual learning process.
All right, thank you. You mentioned earlier regarding M&A within the biotech sector. So at these current valuations, is Cybin currently, obviously I don't think you can tell us who you would be looking at, but is Cybin becoming a target of M&A, or you guys have anything on your horizon that you are looking at?
All the time. I mean, I think my background's in M&A, or part of my background's in M&A, so that's sort of a natural thing for me. But we're always looking, and I think we've got a track record already of transactions. We've had 4 or so that we've announced so far. But continued consolidation, I think, is inevitable. We're already down to maybe half a dozen or so companies, and then a whole tail of companies that have kind of gone dark, quite honestly. And I suspect that a lot of those companies that started a couple of years ago are effectively out of cash, whether they've announced that or not. So we're always out looking for additional technology, IP, data that solidifies our programs or accelerates our programs, and we're always looking at partnerships. I think that partnerships are inevitable at some point, especially outside the US, when we're looking at developing these assets for other markets. Commercialization partnerships are also very likely. Building a commercial infrastructure across 27 markets in Europe doesn't sound like something you want to do from scratch. And having worked in Europe a lot, I know that companies that have existing relationships there with physicians have a great competitive advantage in the market. So there's lots of reasons why we might want to enter into partnerships. And when you're a public company, M&A is always an option, right? Whether you're the consolidator or whether you're the target. So we'll see. I think we will always be looking at the best path to market for our products. If that is part of a larger platform, then so be it. We have a fiduciary duty to shareholders to make sure that the investments we've made so far result in products that come to market.
All right, thank you for that. So we see companies like Atai and Compass going after treatment-resistant depression with their programs. Cybin is going after major depressive disorder with their lead candidate drug, CYB003. How confident are you that insurance companies will be willing to cover psilocybin therapy for MDD?
Okay, so TRD is historically where companies have been targeting new depression treatments. And I'd say that's largely because when you look back over the last few decades, most new drugs that have been developed for depression have been only incrementally better. And if you're only incrementally better for mainstream depression, major depression, and you're competing with generic, safe SSRIs, that's tough in terms of reimbursement when it comes to payers. Payers aren't going to want to go for that. So that's why historically companies have been targeting TRD and not MDD. Here, though, with psilocybin, our psilocybin analog, I think we've got a completely different situation. If we can deliver the kind of results, or even close to the kind of results that we've seen in academic studies, where you see very rapid onset of action and a durable effect that lasts months at a time, then that's a game changer. That's a complete paradigm shift for patients that take SSRIs. And the reality is with SSRIs is that most patients cycle through a few of them, 2, 3, 4 of them, from their GP because they're safe, they're easy to prescribe, they're generic, they're cheap. It's easy for the GP just to switch to the next one or the next one. And the switching might happen because they're either not effective or because of side effects like weight gain or sexual dysfunction that people don't want to live with. But the reality is that by the time a patient gets to a specialist, they've already likely tried 2 or 3 or 4 SSRIs. And that's likely to be the situation when it comes to reimbursement for psychedelics. I think it's very likely you'll have those step edits where payers will require patients to try a number of SSRIs or treatments first, and then psychedelics will become a reimbursable option. I think that's just the real world today, and where psychedelics fit in. But unlike some more negative options that psychiatrists have, because by the time the patients get to psychiatrists, there are very few good options left. Psychedelics are likely to be preferential to, say, ECT or something like that. So I do think that the situation, that the effect sizes that we're seeing, the robustness of effect that we're seeing, means that we can be very competitive in that MDD space. And it's a much larger population, much larger market than TRD. And in our view, likely to incur fewer issues with severe patients, as you might see with TRD and some of those issues like suicidality. So there's a number of elements why we chose MDD over TRD.
All right, now we got the last few questions here. Will participants in the phase 1/2A trial for CYB003 remain on antidepressants if they're already taking them?
Yes, is a short answer. They'll stay on the SSRIs or the SNRIs, not monoamine oxidase inhibitors, of course, but they will stay on those. Our goal is to position CYB003 as an adjunctive therapy. I think that removes the barrier to prescribing for physicians. It removes the need to titrate patients down off their SSRIs. And we know that patients, even though they might be down in terms of they might be titrated down in maybe 5 or 6 weeks, they can get rebound effects for up to 12 months. And then also in our clinical studies, I question the ethics of taking someone off of their SSRI for over a number of weeks, giving them maybe a placebo in the study. Don't forget, not everyone's getting active, and then keeping them off that placebo for many weeks or months as follow-up. It just doesn't seem necessary if we can pair the psychedelic treatment alongside SSRIs, which is where we think that they should be used in the real world. So that's the way we're running our study. We'll see what the outcomes are.
Are there any things to look out for in regards to mixing psychedelics with antidepressants in general as well? Like anything harmful combinations that can happen, like serotonin syndrome, something like that?
Yeah, I mean, serotonin syndrome, I can understand, the issue there, but we're not talking about chronic therapy with psychedelics. We're talking about an episodic treatment. So I think that's less of a concern. There have also been a few small studies using psilocybin and with patients in SSRIs. It doesn't seem to be any negative impact. There may be a slight positive impact, but as long as it's neutral and safe for patients, that's the most important thing. So we can avoid that titration and still be safe for patients. I think that's the way we should be aiming to design these treatments.
Understood. And the last question here is, we already touched on the DMT program, but I wanted to touch on it one more time. So what exactly makes Cybin confident in their DMT program compared to a company like Small Pharma or JHRS? I know that the deuteration is the differentiator here, but is there anything else you can add to that?
Well, so we're deuterating. Our CYB4 program is deuterated DMT. It's not 5-MeO DMT, so that's important. Yeah, look, as I mentioned before, where you deuterate on the molecule is important, and we've been very specific about that. And during the development process, we deuterated DMT in a number of different positions on the molecule. And in some areas of the molecule, it has an impact on duration, and other areas of the molecule it does not. And the level of deuteration also impacts duration. So we made a number of different prototypes. We compared them to each other in our preclinical models. We selected the molecule, the deuterated level and positioning that we thought had the best profile. That molecule is patented. We have a granted patent out to 2041, composition of matter. And we think we've chosen the best option, having looked at a good number of ways to deuterate that molecule, and we think it'd be very competitive.
All right, awesome. Well, that's all the questions that I have for you today, Doug. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Adam, it's great to chat. Thanks for all the questions from you, and of course from the Reddit users that sent them in. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much and have a great day, guys. This is Doug Drysdale with Cybin. Okay, everyone, that is the interview with Doug Drysdale, CEO of Cybin. I hope you guys can derive some value out of that. I apologize if I didn't get a chance to get to all the questions that were submitted. We were short on time, and I just basically couldn't fit all the questions in. So I have those questions written down, and I will happily ask them next time Doug Drysdale is on the show. So thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I appreciate each and every one of you. If you guys can like and subscribe, that really, really helps push these videos through the algorithm and get us more exposure. So I would really appreciate if you guys could do that. And once again, thank you so much for supporting the channel, supporting me, and watching these episodes. And have a great day, everyone.